The Israel-Hamas war has entered a new phase as Israel forged ahead with its assault on Rafah, expanding its airstrikes and ground operations in the southern city of Gaza. Ceasefire talks continue between Israel and the Hamas militants, but we're yet to see a breakthrough. The war in Ukraine, meanwhile, rumbled on as Russian President Putin marked Victory Day, boasting Russia's gains in Ukraine. That's as he began his new 6-year term amid growing conflict with the West. For an analysis on the evolving conflict and potential diplomatic repercussions, we now invite Kim Hyun-wook, professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. It's so great to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Also with us tonight is Matteo Legrenzi, a professor of international relations at Foscari University of Venice. Always a pleasure to have you on our show.
It's great to be back.
All right, Professor Legrenzi, let's start with you. Israeli forces have seized operational control of Palestinian side of Rafah crossing in Gaza, and this came soon after the Hamas militants accepted a ceasefire deal brokered by Egypt and Qatar. What were the terms Hamas agreed to, and why didn't Israel accept them?
Well, the major disagreement here is how is this hypothetical ceasefire going to end? I mean, will it be a permanent ceasefire, or will Israel be in a position to resume its offensive? So to put it simply, the major sticking point is Hamas doesn't want to give up its asset, which are the hostages, without assurances that the offensive will not resume then at a later date. Whereas Israel wants to be able to resume hostilities in the future, to at least capture or kill the ones who organized the October 7 attack.
Well, Israel has repeatedly claimed that the deal accepted by Hamas remains far from meeting its core demands, and the chances of the two sides reaching a breakthrough looks extremely low. Professor Kim, Israel's assault on Rafah began despite U.S. President Joe Biden's urgent warnings against it. The U.S. has confirmed that it has suspended shipments of high-payload munitions to Israel, sending a clear message to its obstinate ally. How would Washington handle things with Israel from this point on?
I think the President Biden is in jeopardy now because he's running for president this year. It's now a general election period for the United States. And Israel-Hamas war is one of the factors that have a negative impact on President Biden's popularity against President-elect candidate Trump. There are many elements that Biden needs to deal with in order for his general election, and this war itself is something that makes his popularity go down. One of the reasons why Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening to President Biden is because this war is pretty much directly related to his domestic political situations. His popularity also is very, very low in Israel. And I think one of the ways that he can continue his regime and prime ministership in Israel is to get a full support from the rightist people and influence in Israel. And in order for that, he needs to continue his warfare, showing to the rightist people in Israel that he has very firm willingness to continue warfare, totally eliminate the Hamas. So that's something that is related to his domestic political situations. I think President Biden now announced that he is cutting off some munitions and weapons provision to Israel, which is something that has high explosive power, and I hope that this can make Netanyahu to stop attacking Rafah and Palestinian territory. But we'll see how it goes. Many experts think that despite all these efforts by the United States, maybe Netanyahu would not stop attacking Hamas.
Well, as you mentioned, President Biden said that the U.S. would withhold the supply of offensive weapons if Israel moves ahead with a full invasion of Rafah. It looks like the U.S. and Israel are now heading toward an uncharted territory, so we'll have to watch closely how things unfold from here. Dr. Legrenzi, Israel looks determined, though, to proceed with a full-scale ground offensive to eliminate the Hamas militants based there. But talks did continue as Prime Minister Netanyahu sent a delegation to Cairo to try to hammer out an agreement acceptable to both Israel and Hamas. What can we expect going forward?
Well, I agree with Professor Kim. I mean, ultimately, I think that the President of the United States holds the last word. The buck stops with him. He has a different vision from Prime Minister Netanyahu on how this should end, how this conflict should end. If he's willing to put enough pressure and convince the Prime Minister to confine its operations to targeted operations, then it is likely that a major offensive will not take place in Rafah, and that because that would result, of course, in terrible casualties. But of course, on the other end, I mean, what the Israelis right now are doing is trying to sort of raise the price for their ultimate agreement to a deal. So we shall see how it ends up. But I mean, ultimately, it's the President of the United States that will have the last word on this.
Well, the Hamas made it clear just yesterday that it won't make more concessions to Israel in negotiations, asserting that Israel is using the talks as a cover to invade Rafah. So a bleak future lies ahead, and it looks like the best we can do is hope that Israel will keep its ground offensive in Rafah limited. Dr. Kim, what are your prospects for future U.S.-Israel relations, and how would possible changes, perhaps a widening crack, impact the ongoing Israel-Hamas war?
Well, we'll see how it goes. It seems like for now, still, even though the President Biden stopped providing, high explosive weapons to Israel, this is not pretty much damaging the relationships too much. In the past, there were several occasions like this. The United States did not provide military provision to Israel. For example, President Reagan, when Israel was attacking Lebanon, he also did not provide weapons to Israel. So these kinds of weapon provision stoppage is not a big deal for the relationship. But the problem is, what would happen from now on? I mean, would Prime Minister Netanyahu continue attacking Hamas and continue warfare despite President Biden doesn't like Israel's behavior? I mean, if that happens, there will be more stoppage and more weapons provision will not be continued. This will be something that makes two countries' relationships to be devastated. And second thing is that, as you have mentioned, I think one of the purposes for Prime Minister Netanyahu is to take a favorable position in ceasefire agreement. Maybe want to have more hostages to be released throughout the agreement. So this is kind of pressure towards the agreement that is more favorable to Israel. But as I have mentioned, it seems like this warfare between Hamas and Israel is something directly related to Prime Minister Netanyahu's political situations. So I think in order for him not to lose the prime ministership, I think it seems like the possibility of his continuing warfare seems much higher than stopping warfare.
So Israel's continual warfare in Gaza is also essential for Prime Minister Netanyahu to stay in power. Now, shifting focus to Russia, President Putin began his fifth term in an opulent Kremlin inauguration on Tuesday. He promised to place the interests and safety of the Russian people above all else in his short inauguration speech. Dr. Legrenzi, how do you foresee his major policy directions at home and abroad over the course of another 6 years? And do you expect some major changes ahead, perhaps a cabinet reshuffle?
Well, I do not think there will be any major departure from current policy. The war will continue, and what President Putin will do is to wait and see the result of the November elections in the United States. And indeed, many international observers are waiting for those crucial elections. And then he would decide on different options and possible alternative after those American elections.
Now, Professor Kim, the inauguration ceremony was boycotted by most Western countries over Russia's war in Ukraine, while South Korea sent Ambassador Lee Do-hun in consideration of the need to manage bilateral relations with Moscow. What are your prospects for future Seoul-Moscow relations?
I think, for now, South Korea is definitely on the side of, democratic coalition. We are together with the U.S. and Japan and trying to be very firm to countries like China and Russia. But the problem is that recent in relationship between North Korea and Russia is directly, making some risky situations for the security of South Korea. Russia is provided by North Korea some munitions for war in Ukraine, and Russia provides some important military technology to North Korea. Of course, this is something that is related to how South Korea provides weapons to Ukraine. For example, if South Korea provides some more lethal weapons to Ukraine, this will be something that is a damage to Russia too. So I think Russia and South Korea is kind of trying to be balancing each other so that those two countries do not cross the red line together. But one of the reasons why South Korea is trying to have more dialogue and management about the Russia-South Korea relationship is because maybe we have to think about the Russia's impact and influence on North Korea issues. Recently, Russia vetoed the renewal of expert panel within the United Nations North Korea Sanctions Committee, and that is a big problem for the North Korea to do some illegal and secret behaviors and actions about weaponizing itself and nuclearizing itself. So I think there are some two-way, policies towards Russia from South Korea perspective. We definitely on the side of democratic coalition trying to pressure Russia, but at the same time we have to try to manage the relationship so that Russia would not cross the red line.
And we'll also have to keep a close eye on Putin's upcoming visit to Beijing and also his expected visit to North Korea as well. Professor Legrenzi, Russia held a large-scale military parade marking the country's Victory Day today. And unlike last year, Russia is gaining ground in Ukraine, flaunting Western military hardware captured by the Russian army in Ukraine in the middle of Moscow. Is Ukraine heading for defeat? How will the war progress from here?
Well, I do not think Ukraine is heading for defeat, but we may be headed toward a possible stalemate. And then a military stalemate would then lead to reassessment of war aims by Ukraine itself. So my prediction from a military point of view is that the fight will continue for longer than what makes sense in terms of like a military fight. And then there will be the establishment of lines of control, and the conflict will end without a political agreement.
So the fight will go on for longer than expected, and it will likely end without a political agreement. Now, along with many factors, one essential domain for Ukraine to keep fighting and to try to win the war is the Western aid, which is quickly drying up. What have you learned on that front?
Well, I mean, even in this, from this point of view, the November elections in the United States will be crucial. If President Biden is reelected, I don't think that there will be sort of much in terms of an abatement of Western military aid, and then President Putin will draw his own conclusion. But it will be a all different ball game if President Trump came back to power. So even for this issue, I think even more in the case of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the deciding step on the international agenda will be the American November elections, the presidential election in the United States.
Now, you've mentioned that you don't foresee a major departure from previous policies after Putin swearing in, but do you think perhaps his inauguration could impact the ongoing war in Ukraine in any way?
Well, I mean, he is, if anything, he is sending this message that he is there to stay, that there will not be sort of like an abatement in terms of the Russian commitment to this conflict. We do know that he is ready to negotiate, but of course it will be a negotiation in his own terms. So in other words, he would have like conquer territory by force. It would have affected an invasion, and then after having seized this territory, we would say, well, now we negotiate on how much territory we hold after this military aggression. And so that is clearly unacceptable for the majority of the sort of like countries around the world, and indeed specifically for NATO. So I think that's where we are at, and then we will sort of have to see what happens in November for the American elections. I do not really foresee any sort of major change on either side between now and November.
Professor Kim, North Korea and Russia boasted their friendly ties marking Victory Day. Kim Jong-un sent a congratulatory message to Putin, while the Kremlin said that it would like to further develop relations with North Korea in all possible areas, calling the North a quote-unquote good and very promising partner. What is your biggest concern regarding their dangerously close partnership?
You know, the Russia-North Korea relationship is something very unexpected from the North Korean perspective. I mean, after COVID situations, North Korea economic situation was devastating. And along with that, North Korean people are very much complaining about the Kim Jong-un regime. We know that North Korean people, they all watch Korean dramas and all the kind of Korean pop star, you know, programs, and they get the hints from those South Korean dramas that North Korean regime is lying about the North Korea situations. So economic situation is getting worse, and also the regime stability by people's complaint is getting higher. So recently, North Korea cut off the relationship with South Korea. They are not talking with South Korea. They are not even making efforts about the unification. And North Korea is pretty much getting isolated. And even China having a bad economic situation, and the Biden government is pressuring China on many issues. So China is not helping North Korea as much as it used to be. So North Korea-Russia relationship is something very astonishing to North Korea. It's giving food and economic aid and military technology to North Korea. So this kinds of relationship is, making North Korea to have some important basis for it, widening its diplomatic relationship with other countries too. What I'm saying is that now it's pretty much the U.S.-based coalition versus China and Russia and North Korea. So this was something between the competition or conflict between U.S. and China. But now, because of North Korea-Russia relationship, it seems like this conflict is now expanding into the Korean Peninsula. Now, South Korea and North Korea relationship is also getting worse and worse. So this is some big burden for South Korean diplomacy.
Well, the two ongoing wars now stand at a critical juncture, and so does South Korea's diplomacy amid intensifying divide between the West and the anti-American bloc, as you mentioned, Professor Kim. And we'll certainly continue our discussions as we move forward. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your thoughts. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.